Sometimes the people we leave behind don't disappear. They become the proof of who we failed to be. The marble lobby of St. Laurent Children's Hospital glowed beneath crystal chandeliers and soft winter light spilling through 40-foot glass windows overlooking Manhattan's Upper East Side. And Adrian Cole barely noticed any of it as reporters followed him through the entrance with cameras flashing like distant lightning around his perfectly tailored charcoal overcoat and polished Italian shoes. The billionaire investor moving through the crowd with the cold precision that had made financial. Magazines call him the king of modern Wall Street. But tonight had nothing to do with stock markets or billion-dollar mergers, because for the first time in years Adrian had agreed to appear somewhere that wasn't tied to profit, power, or reputation. And as hospital executives welcomed him with rehearsed smiles while donors whispered excitedly beneath the golden lights, he kept his expression calm even though exhaustion lingered behind his steel-gray eyes like a storm waiting beyond glass. Because success had given him everything except the one thing money had never managed to replace: peace. "Mr. Cole, the pediatric cardiac wing is ready for the unveiling," one administrator said gently, and Adrian gave a quiet nod before loosening the cuff of his black leather gloves, his attention drifting toward the sound of laughter echoing from the far end of the hallway where children sat around a Christmas mural painting stars and clouds across paper wings taped to the walls. And for a brief second something softened inside him before years of discipline buried it again. But then it happened. A little girl no older than 7 rounded the corner too quickly and collided with his leg, sending a small box of colored pencils tumbling across the polished floor. "Oh no," she gasped softly, kneeling immediately to gather them while curls framed her warm brown face beneath the bright hospital lights. And Adrian instinctively crouched to help her before freezing completely the moment. She looked up at him, because the child smiling nervously in front of him had his smile. Not similar, not close, but his exact crooked half-smile that his mother used to call impossible to hide, even when he was a boy growing up in Louisiana. And suddenly the noise of the hospital faded into silence around him, as his pulse slowed beneath the crushing weight of disbelief. The little girl blinking at him with wide silver-gray eyes that mirrored his own so perfectly it felt like staring into a memory he never knew existed. "Aria." A woman's voice called from down the hallway, warm, calm, unforgettable. And Adrian's hand tightened around the colored pencil still resting in his palm, before he slowly lifted his head toward the sound. Because some ghosts do not return to haunt you with anger. They return wearing white coats and carrying the life you abandoned without knowing it. And standing beneath the cold glow of the hospital corridor in a fitted navy blue doctor's coat was Simone Bennett, the woman he had once loved enough to imagine forever, and the same woman he had left behind 8 years ago on the rainiest night of his life. For a moment neither of them moved beneath the pale hospital lights, and Adrian felt the world narrow into the quiet space between himself and Simone Bennett as memories he had spent nearly a decade burying came rushing back with brutal clarity. New Orleans rain against old apartment windows, late-night coffee from street vendors outside Tulane Medical School, her laughter filling tiny rooms that smelled like books and jasmine perfume, and the impossible dream they once built together before. Ambition and fear destroyed it piece by piece. But Simone did not look like the woman he remembered crying beneath a train station awning 8 years earlier, because the woman standing in front of him now carried herself with calm authority and quiet grace. Her navy blue coat embroidered with the words Dr. Simone Bennett Pediatric Cardiology, while silver earrings caught the overhead lights each time she moved. And yet it was not her beauty that unsettled him most. It was the stillness in her eyes, the kind that only came from surviving pain long enough to make peace with it. "Aria, sweetheart, you cannot run through the hallways," Simone said softly as the little girl smiled apologetically and gathered the last colored pencil from Adrian's hand. "Sorry, Mommy," she whispered before looking back at Adrian with curious eyes that made his chest tighten all over again, because no child should have looked that much like him. Not the smile, not the eyes, not even the tiny nervous habit of biting the inside of her cheek exactly the way he did during investor meetings. "Thank you for helping her, Mr. Cole," Simone said politely, her voice smooth and professional as though they were strangers meeting for the first time instead of two people once close enough to memorize each other's dreams. and hearing his last name on her lips instead of Adrian hurt more than he expected. "You know who I am," he answered quietly, unable to stop staring at Aria as she sat cross-legged near the mural wall organizing crayons by color with careful concentration. "The entire hospital knows who you are," Simone replied gently. "Your donation is helping fund the new cardiac unit." And despite the warmth in her tone, there was distance there too, clean and deliberate like a locked door neither of them knew how to open anymore. Footsteps echoed nearby as reporters and executives approached from the lobby. But Adrian barely heard them because all he could focus on was the child humming softly to herself beneath fluorescent lights while snow drifted beyond the giant hospital windows overlooking Manhattan. "How old is she?" he asked before he could stop himself, and Simone's fingers tightened almost invisibly around the tablet in her hands before she answered. 7. The number landed inside him like shattered glass because 8 years ago was the last time he had seen Simone before walking away from the only future that had ever felt real. And for the first time in years, Adrian Cole, the billionaire who controlled markets and corporations with effortless precision, felt something terrifying slipping beyond his control because deep down, beneath logic and pride and every excuse he had ever told himself, a single impossible question had already begun tearing through his heart. What if the little girl with his smile was his daughter? The gala dinner blurred into meaningless noise after that moment in the hallway. And although hospital executives continued thanking Adrian for his generosity, while camera flashes reflected against crystal glasses and polished marble floors, his attention kept drifting back toward the pediatric wing where Simone had disappeared with Aria only minutes earlier, because no matter how hard he tried to bury the thought beneath logic, one impossible detail continued echoing inside his mind like a heartbeat he could not silence. 7 years old. The number followed him through every conversation until even the expensive champagne in his untouched glass tasted bitter, and when the charity presentation finally ended, Adrian slipped away from the ballroom without warning his security team. Moving alone through the quiet corridors of St. Laurent while soft piano music drifted from hidden ceiling speakers and nurses crossed the halls beneath pools of cold white light, the hospital at night feeling strangely intimate despite its size, almost sacred, and for the first time in years he found himself remembering the version of himself that existed before wealth hardened everything inside him, back when he still believed love could matter more than legacy. His footsteps slowed as he passed the pediatric art room, where hand-painted stars covered the windows in bright watercolor shades. And through the partially open door, he saw Aria sitting at a tiny piano in the corner pressing uncertain fingers against the keys while humming softly under her breath. The melody uneven but familiar enough to stop him cold because it was Moon River, the same song his mother used to play every Sunday morning in their Louisiana home, before success replaced simplicity with silence. "You missed 2 notes," Adrian said quietly before thinking better of it. And Aria looked up instantly with wide, surprised eyes before grinning in a way that tightened something deep inside his chest. "I know," she laughed softly. "Mom says I rush when I get nervous." Adrian leaned against the doorway, trying not to stare too long at the reflection of himself hidden inside her expressions. "My mother used to say the same thing," he admitted. And for a second the little girl tilted her head, studying him carefully, as though trying to solve a puzzle no child should have understood. "You look sad," she said with innocent honesty, and the simplicity of it nearly broke him because billion-dollar magazines had called him powerful, brilliant, untouchable, but no one had looked at him and seen sadness in years. "Do I?" he asked quietly, and Aria nodded while absent-mindedly spinning one of her curls around her finger. "Sometimes. Grown-ups carry storms in their eyes," she whispered. "Mom says storms pass faster when people stop pretending they are okay." The words hit harder than any boardroom betrayal ever had, because they sounded exactly like Simone. Gentle truths wrapped in kindness sharp enough to expose wounds people hid from themselves. Footsteps approached down the hallway moments later, and Simone appeared, carrying patient files against her chest, before stopping the instant she saw them together beneath the warm glow of the art room lamp, something unreadable flickering across her face before professionalism settled over her expression once again. "Aria, sweetheart, visiting hours ended 20 minutes ago," she said softly, and the little girl sighed dramatically before hopping off the piano bench. "Can Mr. Cole come back tomorrow?" she asked innocently. And neither Adrian nor Simone answered right away, because some questions sound simple only until they force two broken hearts to face what they spent years running from. Snow drifted quietly beyond the massive hospital windows as Simone walked Aria toward the elevators with one hand resting gently against her daughter's shoulder, and Adrian followed several steps behind them without fully understanding why he could not bring himself to leave, because every instinct that had once made him successful was warning him to walk away before emotions complicated truths he was not prepared to face. Yet something stronger kept pulling him closer to the life standing just beyond his reach. "Mom, can Mr. Cole hear me play again tomorrow?" Aria asked brightly while clutching her small backpack covered in hand-painted stars, and Simone pressed the elevator button before answering with careful calm. "Mr. Cole is a very busy man, sweetheart." The words sounded polite, but Adrian heard the distance hidden underneath them, the same distance that had not existed 8 years ago when they used to sit together on the fire escape outside Simone's tiny apartment in New Orleans, eating takeout noodles at midnight while planning futures they were too young to understand. Back then, Simone believed in people more than money, and Adrian believed love could survive ambition. But dreams changed the moment his father placed a contract in front of him and explained exactly how fragile the Cole empire truly was. "Busy people still come back if they care," Aria replied innocently, and Simone's expression shifted almost imperceptibly before the elevator doors slid open with a soft metallic sound. "Good night, Dr. Bennett," Adrian said quietly as they stepped inside. And for a second, Simone looked directly at him beneath the pale overhead lights, her eyes carrying years of exhaustion hidden beneath elegance and composure. "Good night, Adrian," she answered softly, the first time she had spoken his name that night, and hearing it again after so many years felt dangerously close to hope. The elevator doors closed between them before he could respond, leaving Adrian alone in the hallway surrounded by silence and the distant rhythm of hospital monitors echoing through the floors above him. Hours later, Manhattan glittered beneath cold winter rain as Adrian stood inside the penthouse office of Cole Ventures, staring out across the city skyline, while untouched files covered the glass conference table behind him. Because no matter how many times he replayed the evening in his mind, the same impossible details continued haunting him. Aria's smile, her eyes, even the way she tilted her head when she asked questions. Every instinct inside him screamed there was something Simone had never told him, but another voice whispered something far more painful, that perhaps she had tried once and he had been too blinded by fear to listen. His reflection stared back at him through the floor-to-ceiling windows, older now, sharper around the edges. A man who had spent nearly a decade building an empire large enough to impress strangers while somehow becoming a stranger to himself. His assistant Olivia entered quietly, carrying tomorrow's schedule, before pausing at the sight of his untouched whiskey glass resting beside the city lights. "You canceled the Singapore acquisition meeting?" she asked carefully, and Adrian loosened his tie slowly, without looking away from the storm outside. "Reschedule it," he answered absently. Olivia blinked in surprise, because Adrian Cole had never rescheduled anything important for personal reasons, not birthdays, not funerals, not relationships. But tonight something inside him had shifted in a way he could not explain. "There is also a file waiting from St. Laurent Hospital," she added gently. "Background information on Dr. Simone Bennett for the donor board presentation." And for the first time all night, Adrian finally turned around. Because some truths do not arrive like explosions. They arrive quietly in folders resting beneath city lights, while a man realizes his past may still be breathing somewhere inside the future he lost. Rain traced silver lines down the glass walls of Adrian's penthouse office as midnight settled over Manhattan in heavy silence, and the file resting on the conference table seemed impossibly small compared to the weight gathering inside his chest. Because for 8 years Adrian Cole had mastered the art of controlling outcomes, numbers, negotiations, entire industries bending beneath the cold precision of his decisions. But nothing in his carefully ordered world prepared him for the quiet ache waiting inside the pages marked Dr. Simone Bennett. He opened the folder slowly beneath the dim amber glow of the city lights, and the first photograph nearly stopped his breathing. Simone standing in a white medical coat outside a free clinic in Brooklyn with exhaustion visible beneath her smile, while holding a toddler against her hip. Aria looked younger there, barely 2 years old, curls tied unevenly with bright ribbons while tiny hands clung tightly to Simone's shoulder, and for the first time Adrian saw something no newspaper article or donor presentation could ever capture: survival. The pages revealed scholarships earned through impossible schedules, overnight residencies completed while raising a child alone, volunteer hours at pediatric shelters, awards for groundbreaking work in congenital heart treatment, and scattered between achievements were details that cut far deeper than success ever could: multiple addresses in low-income neighborhoods, periods of deferred medical tuition payments, overnight emergency shifts exceeding 100 hours a week. Every line quietly exposing years Simone spent carrying burdens he never knew existed. Adrian leaned back slowly as memories returned with painful clarity. Simone studying anatomy textbooks beside him at 2 in the morning, while cheap coffee turned cold between their hands. Simone laughing barefoot in summer rain outside their apartment after the electricity failed. Simone whispering against his shoulder that one day she wanted to build a place where children could heal without their families fearing medical bills. And suddenly the office around him felt unbearably empty, because somewhere along the way he had traded that future for boardrooms and signatures, and people who applauded him without ever truly seeing him. Another photograph slipped loose from the folder and landed near his hand. This one older, grainier. Simone sitting alone in a hospital room beside a newborn wrapped in pale pink blankets, while snow fell beyond the window behind her. There was no husband beside her, no family, no flowers. Only exhaustion and quiet determination written across the face of the woman he once promised he would never abandon. Adrian closed his eyes briefly as guilt spread through him like cold water, because deep down he already knew the truth before any confirmation could arrive. Not through evidence, but through instinct, through the unbearable familiarity of Aria's smile, through the years that suddenly aligned too perfectly to ignore. His phone buzzed against the glass table, interrupting the silence. Olivia's voice came softly through the speaker. "Sir, St. Laurent Hospital just updated tomorrow's donor schedule. Dr. Bennett requested that another pediatric cardiologist lead the tour instead of her." Adrian stared out toward the storm-covered skyline for a long moment before answering quietly. "Why?" There was hesitation on the other end before Olivia spoke again. She said personal history should never interfere with patient care. The sentence lingered heavily in the dark office after the call ended because Simone had not said angry history or painful history. She had said personal, and somehow that hurt even more. Adrian loosened his tie slowly while thunder rolled somewhere beyond Manhattan's glittering skyline. Because for the first time in nearly a decade he realized the woman he left behind had not spent years waiting for him to return. She had spent them becoming extraordinary without him. The next morning Manhattan woke beneath a sky the color of steel as Adrian sat alone inside the back seat of his Blacktown car, staring at the glowing entrance of St. Laurent Children's Hospital. And despite the endless stream of calls flooding his phone from investors, executives, and reporters, he ignored every single one because for the first time in years there was something more important than markets waiting beyond those hospital doors, something painfully human. The lobby smelled faintly of coffee and antiseptic when he entered, while soft instrumental music drifted through hidden speakers above families wrapped in winter coats and exhausted nurses crossing polished marble floors. And almost immediately Adrian spotted Aria, sitting near the pediatric reception desk coloring stars across a sheet of paper with fierce concentration. "You came back," she said brightly the moment she noticed him, as though she had expected it all along. And Adrian felt something fragile shift inside him because very few people in his life had ever sounded genuinely happy to see him. "I said I might," he answered softly before crouching beside her chair, and Aria smiled while pushing the drawing toward him. "This is for the new heart center," she explained proudly, the paper showing a child standing beneath giant golden wings while sunlight poured across the page in uneven yellow crayon strokes. "Mom says hospitals should feel less scary." Adrian studied the drawing carefully before noticing the small handwritten words near the bottom corner. "Hope lives here." And somehow those 3 simple words carried more honesty than every polished speech he had delivered in corporate ballrooms over the last decade. Footsteps approached seconds later, and Simone appeared holding a tablet against her chest, while strands of dark curls slipped loose from the neat bun pinned at the back of her head. Exhaustion lingered beneath her eyes despite the calm professionalism she carried so naturally. "Aria, sweetheart, your echocardiogram starts in 10 minutes, Simone said gently before finally looking toward Adrian. "You did not have to come back," she added quietly. And although her voice remained composed, Adrian heard the careful distance underneath it, the kind built slowly over years of learning how not to expect anything from someone who once walked away. "Maybe I wanted to," he answered before he could stop himself. Silence settled briefly between them while snow drifted softly outside the hospital windows, and somewhere nearby a child laughed down the corridor. "Mom says people only return when they miss something important," Aria whispered innocently while swinging her legs beneath the waiting room chair, and Simone's expression tightened almost invisibly before she knelt beside her daughter to adjust the scarf wrapped around the little girl's neck. "Sometimes people come back because they are trying to understand themselves," Simone replied softly. But Adrian could not ignore the sadness hidden beneath the words because deep down he knew she was not speaking to Aria alone. Moments later, a nurse hurried toward them with concern shadowing her face. "Dr. Bennett, the cardiology lab needs you immediately." Simone stood quickly as professional focus replaced emotion in an instant. "What happened?" she asked calmly. "Pediatric emergency in room 4. The nurse answered, and before Adrian could say another word, Simone was already moving down the hallway with controlled urgency, while the hem of her navy coat disappeared beneath bright white lights. Aria watched her mother leave before leaning closer toward Adrian with quiet seriousness far beyond her years. "Mom does that every day," she whispered softly. "She saves hearts even when hers is tired." And something about the way the little girl said it made Adrian realize the greatest tragedy was not that he lost Simone 8 years ago. It was that he had never understood how extraordinary she truly was until another man could have easily taken his place in the life he abandoned. The pediatric cardiology floor felt colder that afternoon as rain pressed softly against the hospital windows, and the steady rhythm of heart monitors echoed through the hallways like fragile reminders that life could change in a single moment. Adrian sat alone outside examination room, for holding the paper drawing Aria had given him earlier, while nurses moved quickly around him carrying charts and medication trays beneath bright white lights. And despite years spent controlling billion-dollar negotiations without emotion, his hands had not fully stopped trembling since the nurse mentioned an emergency involving Aria's condition, because somewhere between the little girl's smile and Simone's quiet strength, he had begun fearing a truth far greater than the one he originally came searching for. He feared losing something he had only just discovered mattered to him. The doors finally opened after nearly an hour, and Simone stepped into the hallway, removing surgical gloves slowly while exhaustion shadowed her face. Strands of dark curls had escaped completely now, soft against her cheeks beneath the harsh fluorescent lighting. "Is she okay?" Adrian asked immediately before realizing how naturally the concern escaped him. Simone studied him carefully for a moment before nodding once. "Her episode stabilized," she answered quietly. "But her congenital heart condition is progressing faster than expected." Adrian stood slowly as the words settled heavily between them. "How serious is it?" Simone glanced toward the rain-covered windows before speaking again with the calm precision of a doctor who had repeated difficult truths too many times to herself over the years. "Without surgery within the next year, the risks increase significantly." And despite her composed tone, Adrian heard something underneath it. Fear hidden beneath professionalism. The kind only a mother could carry while pretending to remain strong for everyone else. Silence stretched between them until Adrian noticed Simone rubbing tired fingers against her temple. "When was the last time you slept?" he asked softly, and for the first time since seeing him again, something fragile cracked across her expression. Not anger, not bitterness, just exhaustion too heavy to hide. "Anymore. I do not really remember," she admitted quietly. "There are patients, research grants, surgeries, and Aria needs me healthy enough to keep smiling even when I am terrified." The honesty in her voice stripped away every remaining illusion Adrian had built around his own importance, because this woman had spent years carrying responsibilities that would have broken most people. While he attended galas and magazine interviews, pretending success was enough to fill the emptiness inside him. "You should not have done this alone," he said before he could stop himself. Simone let out the faintest breath of disbelief before folding her arms gently across her chest. "Life does not always wait for people to be ready, Adrian," she answered softly. "Sometimes you survive first and cry later." The words settled deep inside him because he suddenly remembered the last night he saw her in New Orleans, rain pouring outside the train station while she stood beneath flickering lights asking him one final time if he truly believed money and family expectations mattered more than the life they planned together. And instead of choosing her, he boarded the train to New York carrying ambition like armor. "Did you ever try to contact me?" Adrian finally asked, his voice quieter now. Simone looked away toward the ICU doors where soft blue lights glowed through the glass before answering with painful calm. "For a long time I wanted to," she admitted. "But eventually I realized the hardest part of loving someone is accepting when they already chose another future." Before Adrian could respond, a nurse approached quickly holding a medical chart. "Dr. Bennett, we need immediate family authorization for Aria's next blood panel and compatibility testing." Simone reached for the paperwork automatically, but froze the moment the nurse added the next sentence without thinking. "If her father is available, matching genetics could help speed up the process." The hallway fell completely silent after the nurse's words, and for a brief moment even the distant rhythm of hospital monitors seemed to disappear beneath the crushing weight of what had finally been spoken out loud. Simone stood motionless beside the glass ICU doors while the chart remained suspended in the nurse's uncertain hands. And Adrian felt his pulse echo painfully against his ribs because deep down he had already known the truth long before anyone else confirmed it. He had seen it in Aria's silver-gray eyes, in the curve of her smile, in the impossible familiarity that had followed him since the first moment she crashed into his life carrying colored pencils and sunlight in her small hands. "I am sorry," the nurse whispered quickly after realizing the tension she had stepped into. But Simone gently took the paperwork from her with calm professionalism. "It is all right," she answered softly before signing the forms with controlled movements that somehow revealed how hard she was fighting to hold herself together. The nurse disappeared quietly down the corridor, leaving Adrian and Simone alone beneath cold white lights, while rain continued sliding against the massive hospital windows overlooking Manhattan. "She is mine, isn't she?" Adrian finally asked, his voice lower than Simone had ever heard it before, stripped of wealth, arrogance, and certainty until only honesty remained. Simone closed her eyes briefly as though the question itself carried years of exhaustion inside it before she answered, "Yes." The single word shattered something deep inside him because there are truths that arrive like storms and others that arrive like grief, quiet enough to change a person forever. Adrian leaned back slowly against the wall, while emotion tightened painfully in his chest, memories crashing through him all at once. The last train station goodbye in New Orleans, Simone crying beneath rain-soaked lights while he walked away believing ambition would eventually make the sacrifice worth it. And suddenly every achievement afterward felt hollow compared to the 7 years he had lost with the little girl sleeping only feet away behind the ICU doors. "Why did you never tell me?" he whispered, not accusing her, but himself more than anything else. Simone looked toward the rain outside before answering with heartbreaking calm. "I tried," she admitted softly. 3 weeks after you left, I flew to New York with every dollar I had left because I wanted to tell you in person." Adrian slowly lifted his eyes toward her as she continued. "But when I arrived at your office, your father met me downstairs before security would let me in." Pain flickered quietly across her face now, old, but still alive beneath years of grace and strength. "He told me you were engaged to Catherine Whitmore, and that your future was already decided. He said a child from someone like me would destroy your career." Before it even started, Adrian felt the air leave his lungs because he remembered that week perfectly. Endless meetings, family pressure, investors celebrating the merger his engagement secured, while somewhere in the same city Simone stood alone carrying his child and believing he no longer wanted them. "I did not leave because I stopped loving you," he said quietly. Simone gave the faintest sad smile before tears finally shimmered in her tired eyes beneath the fluorescent lights. That was the hardest part, she whispered. I always knew you loved me, Adrian. I just realized love is not always stronger than fear. The words settled between them with devastating honesty, while beyond the glass doors Aria slept peacefully beneath soft monitors glowing like tiny stars in the darkness, unaware that the two people who loved her most were finally standing face to face with the truth that had shaped all of their lives. Winter slowly surrendered to spring over the following months as sunlight returned to Manhattan in soft golden waves that spilled through the windows of St. Laurent Children's Hospital, and somewhere between long nights beside hospital beds and quiet mornings carrying coffee for exhausted nurses, Adrian Cole began learning how to become something far more difficult than a billionaire. He began learning how to stay. Aria's surgery had been successful beneath the careful hands of the best pediatric cardiac team in the country, and although recovery came slowly with endless checkups and cautious smiles, the little girl who once colored stars alone in hospital hallways now laughed louder each day beneath brighter skies. Adrian never missed a single appointment, not one piano recital in the rehabilitation wing, not one late-night story beside her hospital bed, while city lights shimmered beyond the glass like distant constellations, and Simone watched it all with guarded disbelief, because the man standing beside her daughter now barely resembled the ambitious young dreamer who once boarded a train and disappeared into another life. This Adrian listened more than he spoke. He canceled meetings without hesitation when Aria needed him. He traded luxury galas for quiet evenings helping with homework at Simone's Brooklyn brownstone, where jazz records played softly through rooms filled with warmth instead of loneliness. One rainy afternoon, Aria sat cross-legged between them, painting tiny gold stars across a poster for the hospital fundraiser, while Simone reviewed patient charts nearby. And Adrian found himself watching the life unfolding around him with painful gratitude, because somehow the family he lost had opened the door for him to return anyway. Mom smiles more now, Aria whispered suddenly while dipping her paintbrush into yellow watercolor. Simone glanced up with amused embarrassment, but Adrian only smiled quietly, because children always noticed truths adults tried hardest to hide. Months later, beneath the pale pink glow of an April sunrise, the grand opening ceremony for the Aria Hope Pediatric Center filled the streets outside the renovated Brooklyn clinic Simone once dreamed about during sleepless nights in medical school. Reporters gathered near the entrance while children chased balloons beneath strings of white lights swaying gently in the spring breeze. But none of that mattered to Adrian as much as the sight waiting beside the clinic doors, Simone standing in a cream-colored dress beneath the morning sun while Aria held tightly to both their hands. There was no bitterness left in Simone's eyes now, only cautious peace shaped slowly through honesty, time, and the quiet rebuilding of trust. Adrian stepped closer as the crowd applauded around them, and for a moment the noise faded into nothing except sunlight warming their faces and Aria laughing between them. You know, Simone said softly while looking toward the children entering the clinic. 8 years ago, I thought losing you destroyed my future. Adrian's expression faltered slightly before she continued with gentle calm. But maybe life was not punishing us. Maybe it was teaching us how to become the people this little girl needed. Emotion tightened in Adrian's chest as he looked toward Aria, the child who unknowingly carried both their broken hearts into something whole again. And beneath the golden light of a new beginning, he finally understood something success had never taught him. Sometimes the greatest miracle is not finding your way back to love. It is discovering love waited long enough to guide you home.